Must be a blue moon coming up next weekend. We got a Mike Davis fight. He's going to be taking on Slava Clause, Slava Borshchev. And for Mike Davis, if you don't know, now you know. I know Dana White likes to say that on his Instagram. But for me, I look at Mike Davis and he made a short notice debut on a week's notice to take on Gilbert Burns, Dern.
How did that end for him?
That fight took place about 3.5 years ago and he got ground out completely and submitted. And it just showed that, like Beast in 25-8, there's levels! So for Davis, he takes some time off, and that's really been the story of his UFC tenure. He doesn't fight very often, and fights Thomas Gifford. And he beat the shit out of Thomas Gifford.
One of the hardest fights I've ever had to watch.
It was very, very difficult. So for Davis, he takes some more time off. He goes out and fights Mason Jones. And unbeknownst to me, Mike Davis was really banged up going into that fight. And he looked really, really good. And you can make an argument 29-28, 30-27. It takes two to tango. It was a fight of the night. But Davis really mixed it up in that fight, utilized his own offensive wrestling to beat Jones. And I know you might be sitting there going, well, Craig, Mason Jones isn't in the UFC anymore. It was a surprise to me as it was to you, like the Tapology votes always are. I was surprised they decided to let him go back.
It is wild, though. Just think, Mason Jones's whole UFC career has happened since the last time we saw Mike Davis in the octagon.
And I mean, if you look at it for Davis, this is kind of what I gained out of all of this. Because if you do consider it, that was a fight of the night. Injuries, setbacks, this and that. But I listened to an interview that he did with, and it's a mouthful, Combat Sports on Fanatics View. Shorten your name with James Lynch because he does interviews for
everybody.
Combat Sports on Fanatics View. And listen, his secondary thing is streaming and gaming. He likes to do that. That's cool. Good for Mike Davis. Good stream of income. Wasn't healthy in the Mason Jones fight. He had a torn labrum, rotator cuff, and bicep longhead on the right side.
It's like CC Sabathia in 2011.
Then he broke his left hand. Left hand in the fight. So Mike Davis, he was suspended for 8 months medically. Then he got COVID, so he's been in and out of matchups. Then nobody seemed to want to fight him. He was booked in a fight against Jai Herbert, but he didn't want to go over to England for the fight. And then they couldn't find him anybody to fight in the States. This was originally supposed to be Mike Davis versus Uros Medic. And on September 14th, on 2 weeks' notice, Slava Borshchev took the call. Both these guys with pro boxing experience. Both these guys strikers. Slava, a K1 champ 2010, 2011. Splitting hairs, but Davis went 3-0 in boxing. Borshchev went 2-0. These guys are strikers to the nth degree. This should be a banger of a fight.
I'm very excited. I am as excited for this fight as I am any on the card. And it is because these are two of the better pure strikers in the division. And I think that's the type of fight we're going to get. It's going to cater to both guys' strengths and not their weaknesses. Now, with Mike Davis, he has some of the better boxing in the division. Just pure boxing. A type of fighter who can go to the body, go to the head, throws in combinations, but can also throw single shots. And that's how you can kind of tell who is a really smart striker and who's just a guy who goes in there and brawls. Some people just throw set combinations. Yes, they have a lot of different combinations, but that's just how they're going to throw their strikes. If they throw the jab, automatically the 2 and the 4 coming right after it or whatever the set combination is. Some other fighters are just that single strike type. The fact that Mike Davis can switch between those two does show a very high level of fight IQ from Davis, but that's the thing. If you have hand injuries, but you're a wrestler, yes, I'm going to worry about it, but not as much, because I'm not as worried about the just force of your hands every single time you're doing anything that is just naturally conducive to your game plan. With Mike Davis and some of those hand injuries, I do worry about how that's going to affect his style. And we had another fighter not that long ago that we asked those exact same questions about, and it was Daniel Rodriguez. Now, Daniel Rodriguez didn't fight like he had hand problems, if that makes any sense. It didn't seem like it affected him all that much, but anytime you have a fighter that does heavily rely on their own boxing and their own power shots, and when they do have hand issues, it does really make me concerned, and especially the type of style that Mike Davis does throw in, because if he is going in there trying to, sit down on a shot, be sound defensively, if he starts to run into those issues very early, and it does force him to fight in a manner like a wrestler. Let's say Mike Davis goes in there and puts his wrestling shoes on. I'm not saying it won't work, because Slava does struggle with some of the takedown attempts, but still, if Davis fights in a manner that's not 100% Mike Davis, that's when some of those counters of Borshchev are going to get through. He throws a great knee up the middle to meet a lot of wrestlers if they do start to go for takedown attempts, and I could see this being a fight where Mike Davis has a lot of success. Maybe the leg kicks of Borshchev start to add up, and they force Mike Davis to then become a bit more of a wrestler, a panic wrestler, to put it into Conor McGregor terms. And if that does happen, I think it's going to open up a lot of those counter shots of Borshchev as this fight continues.
I think the wrestling's a little bit more of a natural part to Mike Davis's game, but as a kid, he was training at Custom Autos boxing gym in New York. So if you look at it for Davis, the craziest part about it is You talk about boxers, and yeah, usually like they struggle, especially because you're holding the big gloves in front of your face, and sometimes boxing defense can either be a good thing in MMA or it can get completely thrown out the window. Watch the way that Mike Davis strikes. He doesn't look like a boxer. He's in and out. He's light on his feet. His hands are also down at Julian Erosa levels. He does not hold his hands up high, doesn't have a Thai stance or a kickboxing stance or a boxing stance. It's very, very low and very wonky, and he can throw from odd angles, but typically he'll walk in, bring his hands up, and then throw his combinations, back up, throw a kick, switch stances. He can really mix it in. We're talking about strikers to the nth degree, but when it comes to Davis and you touch on the hand injuries, look at Floyd Mayweather and Asakura over with Ryzen.
Oh, we can go even further.
Knocked him out.
Joe Calzaghe had hand issues his whole career. 49-0, one of the great Welsh boxers of all time. Paulie Malignaggi had hand problems. Like, a lot of fighters have hand problems. It's just, but that's why I bring up, though, if it's a pure wrestler, you don't worry as much. Whereas if it is a boxer, you do worry about their
To me, I almost gain more of an appreciation out of a guy who's right hand dominant with that heavy right hand out of orthodox stance. And for Davis, torn labrum, torn rotator cuff, torn bicep long. You look at that, bringing in or implementing your wrestling against a guy like Mason Jones, having success with that in the takedowns with that arm, but still throwing power shots with your right hand, mixing in a jab with a broken left hand. What's this guy made out of? He's Beast Boy.
I don't know if you guys remember shout out Secret Base. It's a YouTube channel that
very
makes
good.
Really cool sports videos.
Great Dave Steeb documentary.
But they made one about Penny Hardaway and how the Orlando Magic fell off after they made the finals with Penny and Shaq. You're right. Yes, I gained new appreciation for the toughness of Mike Davis. Penny Hardaway played in the playoffs on an injured knee, and he was never the same after because he competed with those injuries. You could look at Mike Davis in a similar aspect. When you compete with those injuries, it's just putting more and more wear onto something that's already screwed up. And with all this time off, we could see it. Like, that's the biggest problem with Mike Davis. If he was just a little bit more consistent, we would all have a much better idea of where he fits into this whole division because his best skills are as good of, they're as good of an X factor as anybody else in the division has as an X factor. But the issue is, with all this time away and with all these injuries, what percentage of the old Mike Davis will he still be? And maybe this is the fight where he doesn't look great in this fight, but fights again in 4 months and looks really good afterwards. Or maybe he gets the win in this matchup, but we're not completely sold. And then the next time we see Mike Davis, he makes a bit more of an improvement. I just think there's a lot of question marks around this fight.
Both strikers, both very different. For Borshchev, training out of Team Alpha Male, takedown defense, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. It was okay against Dakota Bush until Bush couldn't finally get the takedown. Borshchev finished him. Against Mark Jacasey, Mark Jacasey is the best.
Bo Nickel.
Mark Jacasey is George St. Pierre 2.0, whereas I was a striker, I was a karate guy, to now I'm just a wrestler, and he looked very, very good in that fight. Borshchev had no response to any of it, but in some of his fights, all of them except for the fight against Mark Jacasey, he has Chumbawamba grappling. He gets knocked down, he gets right back up again. So good stuff for Borshchev, but you look at it, the left hook to the body is one of his best shots. He's a southpaw, so his lead right hook is one of his better shots as well, and he utilizes kicks incredibly well. So very diverse guys, very, very fun matchup stylistically. Who's going to look the fresher guy? I know Slava Borshchev's a great translator on Dana White's Contender Series. I can't say the same. Cool. Can't say the same thing for Mike Davis.
Is this a poor man's version of Brad Riddell versus Rafael Fiziev?
I mean, I can get up for both of them, and I don't understand how either of these guys makes lightweight.
That's a very good point, because they both are very big. But for Borshchev, he does throw a little bit, like a few more kicks. He's a bit more like Fiziev, whereas Riddell, a little bit more boxing heavy, reminds me a bit of Mike Davis. That's all. Just draw parallels to another fight.
Well, we look at the odds in this one. Davis open minus 250, minus 184 right now in best fight odds. For Slava Clause, open plus 210, plus 157. I think that's... I get knocked down by Jacasey. I got to get back up again. Now people are kind of coming back after that Jacasey loss. We look at the Tapology votes. Surprised to us as they are to you. I'm going to say over-under because both guys are pretty well fan favorites and favorites of the channel with Fight Night picks. I'll say over-under 70% Davis.
Here's the thing.
It was based on the odds.
For me, I think Mike Davis is going to win over 70%, but I'm going to say that they're lower, I think.
That's slightly over. So 591 total votes, 73% Davis, 65% by decision, 28% by knockout. For the 27% that have Borshchev, 31% by decision, 60% by knockout. Matt, again, this was supposed to be Mike Davis or Medic 2 weeks ago. Borshchev in, so he gets 2 weeks to get ready for it. I don't know if I look too far into that because Davis was getting ready for...
Very similar fighter, I'd say, honestly.
Medic used to like the big takedown over with Alaska FC, but he would kind of strike a little wild. The thing that I liked out of Mike Davis that I did hear, though, big frame, very, very translucent skin like our own, does Viacheslav Borshchev and Uros Medic have. So we'll save that. But when I did listen to Mike Davis when he was talking to James Lynch, it was, I don't look into tape at all. I don't want to know how good this guy is, because if all I do is watch his tape and his highlights, I'm just going to think, I can't beat this guy. He's so good. I'm not going to be able to get the win. So I don't really see it as a huge change for Davis going to Borshchev. For Borshchev on short notice against Davis, oh, well, I get a striker. I wonder if he will kind of underestimate the takedown abilities of Davis, which is a credible part to his game.
I think Borshchev's going to come in trying to get a first-round knockout. And normally it's tough to pick a fighter who has that type of a game plan, but on short notice against a guy in Mike Davis who, again, has big power, but also has the ability to have big power late in a fight as well. He's not the type of fighter who really needs to go out there and knock you out in the first round to be able to get a stoppage. Look at the Thomas Gifford fight. He just beats him up for 14 and a half minutes and then stops him at the end. That's a really hard fight to watch. I'm not joking at all. But I think Slava Borshchev has a much better chance than a lot of people are giving him credit for, especially the Tapology voters, I will say, because I think this is going to end via knockout one way or another, and I think his opportunities to get a knockout are going to be very high in this fight, because Davis is going to go in there to strike with him, at least initially. I can see that if things start going wrong for him on the feet, let's say Borshchev is starting to land that left hook to the body, maybe some of those leg kicks are getting to Davis, then maybe Mike Davis puts on the wrestling shoes, and for that reason, and his ability to have two tones to his game, I like Mike Davis in this matchup, but I think Borshchev is an extremely dangerous fighter in a fight like this, where stylistically you're going to give him what he does best, you're going to go in there to strike with him, and he does have legitimate power and very unorthodox striking ability, so again, I think this is a very difficult fight to predict just because of the power of Borshchev, but I think Davis has a more structurally sound game.
To me, with Borshchev, I've had issues since I watched the Kenley St. Louis fight where he gets dropped and then he gets back up and they strike a little bit more and he gets the win. I've had issues with the takedown defense. I just maybe haven't really been on the side of Borshchev through Dana White's Contender Series in the UFC, and not necessarily in this matchup either, because I do like the well-roundedness of Davis in a matchup like this. Both guys kickboxing, both guys boxing experience. Mike Davis tends to put those wrestling shoes on. You look at his main training partner, who in his last Instagram post weighed 210 pounds, Adolfo Vieira, to get ready. You never know, but I do like that X factor for Mike Davis. This should be an amazing fight, a fight of the night. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have. Some big-time fights on this card. In the co-main event, Rude Boy Randy Brown taking on Masaran Duba. I was born in the 70s, Francisco Trinaldo. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.